She was supposed to be an Olympian. Morgan White of Team USA had worked her entire life for this. But instead of golden moments and glory, Morgan White was here one day, gone the next. Her legacy? Buried under silence, injury, and betrayal. That is until now. A name that was seen as one of the next great names in American gymnastics. She was a team player and had recently won international all-around gold. But by the time the Sydney Olympics began, Morgan had vanished and was suddenly replaced by an alternate. They didn't want us to know what really happened to Morgan White. Behind the podiums and patriotism of Team USA, there was just darkness. As many knew at the time, Morgan had been dealing with a serious foot fracture. And in the months before the Olympics, instead of being given rest or recovery, she was pushed harder and her pain ignored. Morgan finally broke down. The result? She was immediately pulled from the team, and in an instant, she was gone. No routines, no medals, no good explanation. While her foot injury derailed her, much of her story remains unknown. At that time, Morgan had no choice but to accept the fate handed to her. But then, on September 8, 2018, USA Gymnastics released a statement promoting the very coach who pushed her through pain and pushed her out. Morgan had had enough, and so did many others who voiced their anger. While it was hard for her to come forward and relive what happened, she told her shocking truth to the New York Times during weeks of interviews. But when the story finally broke, it nearly broke Morgan. Her voice was muted, her words diluted, and the truth, nowhere close to the full story, seemingly dismissing major events. That's when a friend of hers stepped in, writing an open letter to the world, telling the story the headlines didn't. In this video, I will share the tragic open letter written by a friend of Morgan White, which details her experience at the 2000 Sydney Olympics. They didn't want us to know what happened to Morgan White, but this is the real story of what happened, of what really happened to Morgan White. Telling the story of a survivor is a great privilege. It's an opportunity to give an individual back her voice, to provide a platform through which she can share her story, and to help her take back some of that power that was so traumatically stripped from her. But with that privilege comes great responsibility. The responsibility to accurately represent her story, to convey the magnitude of its injustice, and to illuminate, where possible, the failed systems that allowed such abuse to take place. Those were the words of Lilly McCoy, a close friend of Morgan White. Lilly wrote the open letter sent to New York Times writer Juliet Macur. It was apparent in Lilly's letter, many things in Juliet's 2018 article were left unsaid. Let's start from the beginning. After a fourth-place finish at the Olympic trials, Morgan was proud of her placement. It was enough to make the 6-person Olympic team, but she was relieved when her name was officially called. Although Morgan rarely scored over a 9.0 on the vault, she was powerful for her size. She became known for her great form, and she fought through every routine she performed as though her career was riding on it.
It's definitely at my peak, and I look back at what I did and my routines and where I was, and I was just really awesome.
She was seen as a perfectionist who expected a lot of herself in her gymnastics, always aiming for greatness, and luckily sometimes she would achieve it. On her best event, uneven bars, Morgan showed extreme flexibility in her shoulders, and a rare skill she created became named after her in the code of points.
Comes up right here, very difficult.
That's the white.
She trained at Cincinnati Gymnastics under Mary Lee Tracy, one of the most visible and vocal coaches in the U.S. program.
Good job. Good cover on the front, Sean's mom. Baby number 10 on the start line.
Mary Lee was known for her gym. Her discipline and her reputation, good and bad, helped many advance to the national team. Morgan's story would later reveal the darker side of Mary Lee, a side that left Morgan injured inside and out. In Sydney, Morgan was training for the qualifying round, And behind the scenes, she was battling something worse than nerves. She had pain in her left foot, severe enough that she was quietly sent for scans. While working with the team doctor, she would become one of the hundreds he abused, but with Morgan, he went a step further. He gave Morgan an injection in her foot that caused her injury to worsen. What's worse, while traveling to the hospital with the team doctor, she lost an entire day of memory. She was drugged by him and lost the entire day. And for the first time, Morgan told someone about this. However, the New York Times article failed to mention this, or her foot injection. Unfortunately, just days before the Olympic team competition, Morgan was withdrawn. The official reason? Injury. But the truth? It was far more complicated. For 18 years, all the public knew was that Morgan White's Olympic dream was stolen by bad luck, a fracture, a medical fluke. But in 2018, USA Gymnastics made a move that forced Morgan to finally speak. They promoted Mary Lee Tracy to a new role, Elite Development Coordinator. The job? Tracy would have overseen the developmental pipeline for women's gymnastics. And for Morgan, that appointment was too much to stay silent. She wasn't the only one. In fact, Aly Raisman was first to come forward in a series of social media posts arguing Tracy had stood with the team doctor in the past. She writes, USA Gymnastics has appointed someone who, in my view, supported Larry, victim-shamed survivors, and has shown no willingness to learn from the past. This is a slap in the face for survivors, and further confirmation that nothing at USAG has changed. What a profound disappointment. Mary Lee Tracy responded, and she claimed she never meant to hurt Morgan, that she was heartbroken to hear how her coaching had been perceived. But it was too late for convenient apologies for the record. The New York Times picked up the story and interviewed several athletes, including Mary Lee Tracy. The article hinted at a pattern, but it didn't dig deep. It didn't ask why no one stopped it. The Times article lit a spark on both sides. But what came after started the fire. There is some real anger here. But in my opinion, they really did drag their feet on casting any blame, even though they had all the proof. The following is the open letter written by a friend of Morgan. Finally, we are able to understand the truth of what really happened to Morgan White. The letter is shocking. Just a fair warning. Discretion is advised. I was horrified to see you and the New York Times so grossly fail in your journalistic duty to accurately share the story of my dear friend, Morgan White, member of the 2000 US Gymnastics Olympic team. Her sexual abuse at the hands of former Olympic team physician, Larry Nassar, as well as the long-standing emotional and physical abuse perpetrated by her coach, Mary Lee Tracy, not to mention the toxic environment and neglectful oversight of USA Gymnastics that enabled both. Last year, Morgan joined the courageous group of women bringing a lawsuit against USAG for its role in enabling Nassar's horrendous sexual abuse of hundreds of gymnasts. She was quite reticent to openly share the details of her own story. It was only when her former coach, Mary Lee, was appointed to a high-level position within USAG, and you, Juliet, reached out to her that she decided to publicly discuss her experience as a gymnast. She felt that it was her responsibility to speak up about what kind of person and coach she knew Mary Lee to be. She wanted to help bring about change in the world of USA Gymnastics and protect future gymnasts from the abuse she experienced. But because of the way you and the New York Times represented her story, I wish she never had. In the brief paragraphs you wrote about Morgan, you managed to misquote, misrepresent, and even belittle and seemingly attempt to discredit her story. I'm so shocked that the New York Times, the same paper that won the Pulitzer Prize just this April for its previous coverage of sexual harassment and assault, could allow such journalistic negligence and misconduct. Juliet, I hope you are ashamed of yourself. You forced a survivor to continually relive the trauma with hours upon hours of interviewing over the phone over the last few months. I can count on one hand the number of people to whom Morgan has told the full story of her sexual assault. Morgan trusted you, and you completely betrayed that trust. You told her that her story was powerful, It is. And that it deserved to be heard. It does. And then you twisted it into something else entirely. And for what? If you wanted a powerful example of Nassar's abuse, the things that he did to her were 1,000,000 times worse than stroking her leg. Why not describe the way he sexually assaulted her as a teenager alone in her cabin at the Caroli Ranch? How he used the guise of medicine to violate her so horrifically. How he manipulated her fierce dedication to her sport, her fear that her injury would prevent her from competing, the culture of toxic silence in the gymnastics world to his advantage. The way he drugged her, how she has no memory of an entire day spent alone with him unchaperoned, and yes, touching her in the back of a car, when he took her to Houston to get an MRI. How he gave her the wrong shot in her foot that aggravated her injury, but blamed it on another physician. If you wanted to reveal Mary Lee Tracy's true character, maybe you should have described her cruel emotional manipulation as more than mere haranguing. Maybe you should have discussed the way she constantly weighed Morgan and criticized her body, calling her fat, restricting entire food groups from her diet, encouraging her to use laxatives, wrapping her body in cellophane and forcing her to run laps around to gym to lose weight when she was a mere 80 pounds. You could have accurately described the hell she put Morgan through the weeks leading up to the Sydney Olympics as she was dealing with an injured foot. You mentioned that she went against doctors' orders to ice and use a protective boot, but that doesn't quite convey the way she was forcing Morgan to train in the weeks leading up the Olympics. While other team members were doing lighter routines and being allowed to land on soft surfaces, Mary Lee forced Morgan to do grueling repetitions on hard surfaces despite her injury, grabbing her and digging her nails into her arm while she threatened that she would be on the next flight home if she didn't walk normal when the pain was impossible to hide. Instead, you belittled her experience, allowed Mary Lee to seemingly refute the claims without giving Morgan a chance to respond, and quickly followed with another gymnast's endorsement of Mary Lee. If you wanted to point to the many ways that USA Gymnastics and the US Olympic Committee failed its gymnasts, you had endless fodder. You could have delved into the deep dysfunction of the Caroli Ranch, where athletes were pushed to breaking, where a sexual predator was given full access to to children's, solitary sleeping quarters, and where parents were not allowed. You could have enumerated the years of complaints USA Gymnastics received about Larry, yet did nothing, and even hid implicating documents. You should have described the way Morgan was tossed aside, not even allowed to speak to her parents, stripped of her Olympic credentials, and even prohibited from walking in the opening ceremony, or sitting with her team in Sydney once the stress fractures were found in her foot and she had to pull out of the competition. You had such a powerful opportunity to use a survivor's story to shed light on the deeply toxic, unsafe environment that is the current world of gymnastics, to help bring about change and move this sport in the right direction. But you not only squandered it, you moved it backwards. Minimizing Morgan's assault by Larry Nassar and publishing Mary Lee's lies about her treatment of Morgan serve as a warning to other survivors. That same old warning they've heard again and again. To stay quiet, to just keep it inside, that people won't believe your story, that speaking up will cause even more pain, that change is impossible. Well, let me tell you a little bit about the incredible woman you just maligned. Morgan is by far the strongest person I know. She is deeply kind and compassionate. It was so hard for her to come forward and say anything negative about Mary Lee, even though every word of it was the truth. She has worked so hard to leave the world of gymnastics behind. She's built a beautiful and meaningful life for herself in Cincinnati, working as a special ed teacher for students with severe behavioral issues. She's learned to channel her incredible athleticism into a serious yoga practice that brings her joy and peace. She is beloved by a group of friends who have never stepped foot in a gymnastics arena and deeply supported by her wonderful family. On top of everything she's had to withstand over the last year, she's also undergone multiple hip surgeries, concluding in a recent full hip replacement from which she's still in recovery. But for the record, Morgan has never blamed Mary Lee for her current hip issues like you wrote. She attributes it to her congenital hip dysplasia. I know she will overcome all of this. She has a deep and quiet strength inside of her that one can only admire. But the thing is, she shouldn't have to. She shouldn't have to deal with you and the New York Times misrepresenting and trivializing her story on top of everything else she has and is still working to overcome. No survivor should. You and the New York Times should have understood both the privilege and the responsibility that come with sharing a survivor's story. Unfortunately, you did not. And for that, I hope you feel truly ashamed. Sincerely, Lilly McCoy.